Exxon was in command of the shuttle from their cruiser to the planet below, AM-class world with a native sapient species, and was sitting in his chair, carefully guiding the craft down through the atmosphere, avoiding the planet's air traffic and ensuring they remained on target, while his navigator monitored the stealth to ensure that radar and other detection systems missed them, as the natives weren't quite technologically advanced enough for first contact unless they suddenly faced an immediate risk of mass extinction. "All right, crew, we're at 2,000 meters and dropping. Exxon, I want you by the door, ready in case anything goes wrong. Aaron, get your kit together. Kevon, I want you double-checking for any signs they've seen us." His crew dispersed, Exxon, the Marine, checking his rifle and moving to the door while Aaron grabbed his pack, checking all his scientific kit was safely secured within it. As they touched down in a clearing in the woods, remote enough that the odds of someone walking into it were low while close to a few towns, to make initial observations easier, they would probably stay here a week, then move off to a different part of the world, rinse and repeat a few times. Obviously, if there was any sign the natives had seen them, they would clear off and put a stealth monitoring beacon in the solar system to watch them until they developed FTL, at which point they would be officially contacted by the Empire and offered membership of the Empire Empire. As they passed the 50-meter mark, Kevon suddenly shouted from his position, "Sir, we missed a couple of houses deep in the wood. We should be clear, but it'll be close." "How close are we talking?" Exxon held the shuttle steady. "They won't feel anything, but it's a higher risk of them walking into us." I say we carry on, but only spend a couple days before we leave." "Any issues with that plan?" The three crew nodded, albeit somewhat slowly in Exxon's case. "All right, touchdown in under a minute should be gentle enough." Sure enough, a minute later, the ship was safely on the forest floor, thoroughly invisible to anyone who didn't have the special contact lenses the crew had in. The only way they were going to be found was if someone actually walked into it, and despite their error in avoiding houses, there wasn't any evidence of paths near the shuttle. "All right, I want you with me double-checking the area. Check our sensors haven't missed anything else. Kevon and Aaron, do anything you can from within the shuttle. I don't want either of you out till me and Exxon have checked the surroundings." John was sitting in his house, browsing the latest updates from the world of science and magic, and as usual not finding anything of interest. Idly, he wondered about actually participating in one of the communities, rather than just being a perpetual lurker, but shrugged the thought off for another time. He looked at the time, 4 o'clock. Maybe he should go for a walk to get some fresh air. He stood slowly and went toward his room to get some socks, but stopped short when he noticed a red flashing light on his security board. He jogged over, curious as to why the alarm hadn't sounded, then stopped worrying about that as he noticed which sensors had triggered, not the ones that usually tripped when someone went a little off the footpath. Curious, he abandoned his plans for a walk and went out to investigate, grabbing a breaker bar and a torch from the garage on his way out. Double-checking where the alarm was, he quickly walked over and started looking around. He didn't really need the torch, seeing as it was still mid-afternoon in summer, but he still made a point of shining it around anyway. Dang it all. The reason I use magic is it's good at not giving false positives other than near the path itself. I wonder if the thing's broken again. As he walked out, following a slightly different route, he felt his breaker bar bounce off something slightly. Half turning, he swung at the offending branch, or so he thought, with more strength only to hear a clank and see the bar bounce off of thin air. Confused, he dropped the bar at his feet and slowly walked forward with his arms in front of him. Zombie-like, pretty quickly he felt something, a smooth, slightly curved metallic surface. Not seen anything like that before. Well, not seen, I guess, felt. He turned away and picked up the bar, shouting out, "Anyone here? Show yourself now." Silence ensued. "This is your final chance. I'm going back to my house to get my scopes. If I see anyone there, I'm calling the police unless you show yourselves now." As the silence dragged on, he sighed and turned back to his house, swinging the bar from side to side as he went. Going up to his room, he opened up the safe he kept his more valuable stuff in and took out his revealing scopes, a device rarely seen outside of the police and military because of the cost. But he'd picked up a pair a few years ago and since found them useful occasionally, but this would be their first major test. They worked by projecting an image of what was actually in front of you on the metal screen, using the magic-infused garnet to see through all but the best magical illusions and any technological shielding yet found. He also grabbed a couple of revealing cubes, little cubes that were easier to defeat, but worked in a sphere about 10 meters across, and could be dropped on the floor rather than being worn constantly. They also worked for anyone in their area of effect, but that was only likely to be him anyway. Aaron and Kivon were looking at some of the moss, comparing it to various other planets they'd looked at in the past, when Exan suddenly got an alarm on his tablet. "All right, pack it up. We've got contact on the ship. The person has left, but that's no guarantee they won't be back." "Really?" Aaron looked less than pleased, but still started picking up his stuff. "Yup, one person. We almost got away with it. He was just walking away when he brushed him with a metal bar he was carrying." "Right, well, hurry up then." The captain took charge of the situation. As the crew of the ship were hurrying back to it, John was walking out to the same place as before, with his goggles on and running. It didn't take him long to see the ship, a sleek shape, roughly the length of a small boat, maybe 25 meters and 5 or 6 tall, resting on a fairly simple-looking frame, like a helicopter's. As he got closer and could make out the door halfway along the side, he suddenly saw 4 figures running toward the ship. They looked vaguely mustard, tall, thin bodies, covered in fur where he could see skin through the clothing and packs they were carrying. "Hey, you there? Stop there. What are you doing on my land?" He shouted at them while fumbling in his pocket for his phone to call the police. As they heard the shout, all 4 of the aliens abruptly stopped, Exan drawing a pistol from its holster. "How can he see us?" he hissed at the rest of them. "He's wearing something weird on his head. Maybe it can see through the shielding?" "Whatever. He's trying to grab something. We probably don't want to let him. Can I try and scare him?" "Fine, but don't hit him." Exan nodded at him. Exan quickly fired 3 shots at the tree near the person, then mimed raising his hands. The person looked undecided, then hurriedly complied as Exan raised the gun again. "Okay, what do we do now?" Kivon spoke up. "We can't just shoot him, and we can't talk to him easily to explain what we want. We can talk to him a bit. I've been listening in on their transmissions, and I've got a basic version of their language loaded into the computer." Aaron, the quietest member of the group, spoke up. "Right, can you get that onto a tablet?" Exan looked more optimistic already. Aaron nodded, already turning towards the hatch. "Right, you do that. We'll stay here and keep an eye on him." Exan turned back towards the intruder, keeping an eye on him. While Aaron was in the ship, loading what his systems had picked up of the local language onto a tablet, John was standing outside with his arms getting tired of being held upright. Slowly, he lowered them toward his head, watching the alien with the gun the whole time. When the alien didn't look unhappy about this, he rested them on his head and waited for anything else to happen. He was hoping the alien who went into the ship wouldn't return with a mind wipe or something similar, as this was about the most interesting thing that had happened to him for years. Aaron waved his tail impatiently as the circle slowly filled on the tablet before grabbing it and dashing out of the hatch again. "Exan, I've got it set up so this tablet is linked to mine. Anything I type on mine will show up on his, translated into his language and vice versa, at least as well as the software can, with the somewhat limited dictionary we have for his language." "Right. Send a message explaining that to his, and pass it here. I'll give it to him." Aaron nodded and passed the tablet over, quickly typing on his. Watching as the aliens looked at a device that looked suspiciously like a modern computer tablet before he was past one that had an English keyboard, admittedly in no logical pattern, at the bottom and a message at the top. "This is a communications tablet. Anything you type below will be visible to me in my language. Who are you, and why are you here?" "We are from the Krylon Empire, and we are here to explore your planet and find out about it and you before you develop FTL and contact us for the first time." "Why? Wait, you have L how?" "Basically, just to check that you're not likely to be completely xenocidal or anything similar. We've found evidence of old civilizations in the stars that collapsed due to war, and we've had history with powers like that, so we're taking no chances. As for FTL, we can't tell you much, because I'm not an expert in how it works, and also we're not meant to interfere with your technological evolution. Surely you've already done that just by talking to me." "Not much, and we're planning on leaving soon and asking you not to tell anyone about this." Sighing, he put down the tablet and stretched his arms out, thinking, "This is way more interesting than the glacial progress of most bits of modern science," but he hadn't seen any sign of magic. "Did you completely stop using magic, or do you just not have any with you?" Aaron looked at the screen in confusion. "Guys, he's talking about magic, completely seriously." Exxon shrugged. "You know what the Southern Empire was like, at calling things magic to discourage commoners from learning more about it. Why don't you just ask?" Kevon looked at John. "He seems fairly aware of what's up with the tech. Maybe the translator just glitched a bit." "It's possible, although it is performing better than I expected." Aaron started typing again. "Could you explain magic for us? You guys don't have it?" "It's something we've had longer than modern technology. We've got record of it going back 4,000 or 5,000 years. It uses energy from certain gems to provide power, although it doesn't seem to follow any hard rules, so it's mostly been passed over in favor of science, which is mostly easier to predict." "That's weird. Do you have any examples?" "Yeah, these goggles I'm wearing that. Let me see you are magic. Hey, apparently he's using magic to see our ship." Aaron called out to the others. "If he can do that, can he threaten us?" Exxon sounded slightly concerned and brought up his sidearm again. "Do you have magical weapons?" "Not on me. I've got one back at the house, but it's only a knife. They're quite hard for a civilian to get hold of." Exxon looked at the message and lowered his gun again. "Can you show us more of how you use magic?" "A bit, but it would be easier if you let me go back to my house, and if you turned off your suits." While the aliens had a discussion, John thought, if they truly didn't know about magic, this might be a chance to learn some stuff about them in return. Maybe accelerate our own FTLA bit. Although whether anyone would believe him was a different matter. Eventually, the aliens started walking towards him, with the one who had been talking with him stopping to write a final message. "Are there any other people at your house?" "Nope, just me." "Okay, we'll disable our suits then." He took his goggles off, and the aliens remained where they were, one disappearing briefly before reappearing. The shuttle, however, was still invisible. He started walking back the way he came to his house, thinking about some things to show them. He had a neat pair of scales, powered by a ruby and a garnet. The best, if he could find them, would be his translating jewelry, as it would hopefully let him talk to them rather than just typing. Other than that, he had all sorts of useful gizmos. He did want to look inside of their ship, but he doubted they'd let him do that and then leave. Maybe it was worth trying to join them, but why would they take him? Soon enough, he was opening the door to his house and welcoming in the aliens. Bringing up the tablet, he started explaining what his plan was. "If you wait here, I'll have a look and see if I can find some translating jewelry I've got. If not, I can carry on using this, but they'll make it easier." After another quick conversation, Three of the aliens sat down carefully on the chairs, while the one with tablet asked to accompany him. Reluctantly, he agreed and went up the stairs to his room, where he thought the jewelry was. Aaron followed the alien, who he still didn't know the name of, through the house. It was a bit messy, but nothing unusual for a younger person living by themselves. As they entered what seemed to be a sleeping room, the alien then started looking around in a reinforced cupboard, presumably looking for the jewelry he had mentioned earlier. Suddenly, he shouted something and put a small wooden box on the bed, before opening it to reveal 4 identical amulets, with a fairly plain design, but made of gold, with a green gem in the middle. The alien put one on, pushing the gem down in its socket, before passing one to him. He carefully took it and pushed the gem in the same way, feeling it click into place. He started to put it on, then paused, wondering if it was a trap of some sort, before deciding it was unlikely. Shrugging, he dropped it on and cautiously spoke. "Hello? Woo, it works between species." The alien seemed happy, and it was definitely working. "My name is John. You?" "I'm Aaron, an Azanian from the planet Kryl. What do you call this planet?" "We're humans from Earth." As they went back downstairs, with John carrying the other 2 amulets with him, Aaron looked around him in a bit more detail, asking a couple of questions. "Do your lights work with magic?" "Not most of them. They mostly just use electricity. But I've got a torch and a couple of lamps that have garnets set in them in case the power fails. That's fairly standard in larger buildings, as emergency lights." "Actually, how do you do emergency lights if you don't have magic?" "Big batteries, apart from a few buildings that have their own solar or geosystems. Surely the batteries need replacing every few years. We've extended their lifespan a decent bit over the years, but yeah, don't gems run out eventually?" "Nope. We're not sure how, seeing as that seems to be infinite energy. But they do, although if you work them too hard, then they break and won't work again." "No, although they still use circuits roughly like electrical ones, using gold." "Gold and gems? That sounds like it could get expensive." "A bit, but synthetic and rough gems work, and we've got quite good at extracting gold." Noticing that they'd stopped walking, Aaron started walking again. Going down the stairs, he noticed a smooth section next to it with a blue gem at the bottom. Resisting the temptation to ask immediately, he made a mental note to ask later, once the other crew could understand. The other 3 had been sitting in the living room quietly talking and looking around, not noticing anything stereotypical magical, no bubbling pots or flying contraptions. As the 2 came back in, they turned to look at them, looking for any jewelry, and spotting the green of the amulets quickly. "John here," Aaron pointed at the alien, "found the jewelry, but there's only 2 more, so you'll have to sort that out. I found some stuff out, but most of I'll explain when you've decided who's wearing the amulets." Our host is a human called John. Deciding he was the least interested in the magic and could probably do his job only listening to one side of the conversation, X and waved for the other 2 to grab an amulet. As they stood up and picked up one each, watching as Aaron pushed the gem into the on position before looping the chain around their necks. "Hey, can you all understand me?" John asked again. "Yeah, easily. How does this work?" The captain answered, more curious than ever about this. "The emerald in the center powers the magic, but more than that, I can't say." "That's just weird." Kevon shared her captain's curiosity and started experimenting with lifting the gem on and off her chest. Utgar turned off the advertising beacon and turned on the TEMPORIRIOUTOFSERV automatic message. He was an Ursoid dealer in salvage. He was once a respected ship repair dock owner, but some bad luck with some bad bets had left him bereft. Everyone likes a little gambling, and when a Menix gambler put up his own ship dock on an utterly impossible long shot, Utgar couldn't resist. He was about to double his business because the Menix was willing to risk everything on a race, because the ship's logo was the same as his astrology birth sign. Menics were well known for their advanced astronomy and fanatical adherence to astrology. The ship the Menics was betting on had a substandard engine with an inexperienced pilot, and it needed several repairs. But the local ringed planet and moons that were the racecourse were going to be intersecting the visual line of sight of the Menics astrology constellation, which he had interpreted as a guaranteed omen of victory. The other gamblers and race enthusiasts had laughed uproariously at the Menics, who was seeking wealthy gamblers who could match his bet. Other Menics present had joined their fellow avian, also certain of the omen. To match the bet, Utgar had bet his entire business, including a scrap and salvage depot. The unbelievable victory was probably the strongest evidence ever that could proselytize aliens into Menics astrology. The race course involved circling around the ringed planet and several of its moons, passing through the rings and dodging cosmic debris. Utgar's racer had easily outpaced the Menics racer, as one of the neglected repairs seemed to be intermittent power failures. However, the one thing that the inexperienced pilot could do well was restart the engine. The Ursoid's racer was having to stall quite often to slow enough to maneuver through the prescribed course, sometimes having to go through a section repeatedly. The Menics racer would simply suffer a power failure, drift. Then, when the pilot saw the ship oriented correctly, he would kick on the engine again. The result was that the pilot actually steered through the course in the most efficient way possible by sheer dumb luck. The Menics racer exited the course just ahead of the Ursoid racer, with the last straight stretch to the finish line. The Ursoid racer easily gained then past the Menics. It seemed like certain victory, except the Menic ship had shot a grappling line at the Ursoid ship. The sudden jerk had thrown the Ursoid off course. The Menic ship released the grappler line and continued plodding along to the finish. Once the Menic ship reoriented, it came back, making a beeline for the finish. Just as it was about to pass the Menic ship again, the Menic ship suffered another power failure. In a panic, the pilot immediately restarted the engine, even though the racer wasn't pointed in the right direction. The Ursoid racer crashed into it, suffering slight cosmetic damage. The Menics racer wasn't so lucky. The poor space dinghy practically exploded on impact, with the pilot cabin getting stuck on the nose of the Ursoid ship. The Ursoid ship flew through the finish, with the terrified Menics pilot desperately clinging for dear life. Nothing left of his ship but the pilot cabin and the piece of hull with the logo. Utgar had roared in triumph, thinking of the wealth he had just acquired, until the gambling coordinator came up to him, demanding the ownership titles to Utgar's wagered property. It seemed that as long as the pilot and any portion of the ship arrived at the finish, it counted for finishing the race. Even though the Menics piece of ship hadn't been using its own power, since it was attached to the front edge of the Ursoid ship, it had technically crossed the finish first. Utgar had tried to argue against the use of the grappler line, but physical grappling devices were considered too primitive to be mentioned by the rules, and therefore legal. Utgar was beside himself. His wife was pregnant with twins and about to start prenatal hibernation. He had eagerly looked forward to telling her before she fell unconscious, or perhaps surprising her when she awoke to give birth. Instead, he was completely bankrupt. He had no idea how to face his wife. Fortunately for Utgar, the refreshment server was an attractive female that managed to convince the Menics gambler that the local deity would curse him for leaving Utgar completely destitute. Her culture highly esteemed luck and charity to the impoverished. If you dropped currency on the ground, you had to leave it. If you picked it up instead of leaving it for someone in need, then the local god would punish you for your greed. The Menics was skeptical about how much influence an alien deity could have, but decided not to risk it. He gave Utgar the scrap and salvage yard back. Utgar's wife was in a rage at the news, backhanding him with all of her strength. As she vented her considerable wrath on Utgar, onlookers noted that it was the most impressive display of domestic violence that they had ever seen. The same refreshment server, surely a disguised benevolent divine being herself, had slipped Utgar a huge serving of fat marbled meat with a large side of sweet berries and other fresh fruits to give her as an apology gift when breaking the news at home. She had eaten the meal and wandered off to her slumber/birthing area, still spewing terrifying threats as she drifted off to sleep. Utgar had been out a couple days later, looking for repair shops or recyclables dealers that he could potentially sell salvage to, when he encountered a drunk and grizzled human veteran begging. The veteran appeared to be well past his prime and was missing part of an arm and a leg. Just then, another passerby bumped into Utgar, causing him to drop several pieces of currency. Utgar stared at the precious money, which had landed at the leg stump of the veteran. Utgar and the human had looked at each other for a moment, and Utgar remembered the server's admonition about not picking up dropped currency. Desperate for any good luck to be found in the universe, Utgar told the veteran to keep the currency. The human had thanked him profusely, then pulled out an alcohol flask and invited Utgar to sit with him and share the flask. They talked, sharing their troubles. The human shared the story of how he had lost his limbs in an internal conflict called Blood River. Utgar had heard of human savagery and rumors of how horrific the Blood River incident was, which the veteran seemed to confirm. Utgar told the story of his failed gamble, to which the vet replied, "Damn Smokey. I'd rather go back to Blood River than tell my pregnant old lady something like that." Utgar was puzzled at the nickname Smokey. Evidently, before joining the galactic community, humans had worshipped every type of god conceivable, including deities that appeared as non-sentient animals. This god Smokey was a primitive Ursoid, who was the guardian of forests and warred against the god of fire. When hearing of Utgar's salvage yard, the human perked up. "Hey Smokey, are any of those old ships habitable? They don't have to fly, just keep you from freezing and cooking out in the black." Utgar confirmed he had a handful of such ships that he wanted to repair, but didn't have the funds. The human chuckled, "That's all right, Smokey. You let me bunk down in one of those ships, and I'll help you move the rest. See, I was a comms specialist before I got blown to modern art, and my papa worked as an independent freight hauler. I know transponder codes to networks where you can find customers. Do we have a deal?" The human stuck out his intact hand. Utgar was unsure of what to do, so he extended his own poor hand. The human had clasped 3 of Utgar's fingers in his own tiny hand, gently jerking the fingers up and down. "It's called a handshake. My people do it to show agreement, especially when making a deal." The human had moved into one of the derelicts and immediately got to work. He did seem to make some psychological progress, reducing the amount of time he became intoxicated every day to a few hours in the evening. He was good for his promise. He got onto the communications channels, reaching out to potential buyers. Human language was bizarre to say the least, but this seemed to bring it to a whole new level. Xenolinguists and translation has always had ongoing issues with human languages. Why can't they pick just one? With some linguists speculating that each human actually invented its own dialect. Xenoarchaeologists, who studied human history, weren't surprised by the number of conflicts that came from miscommunications, but rather that there weren't more. It seemed that the most formidable human trait wasn't a genetic attribute such as claws or size, aggressiveness, or even intelligence, but the ability to survive and thrive in chaos. Utgar's wife would occasionally awaken briefly during her gestational hibernation to eat and hit Utgar again. Utgar kept the human out of sight, not sure how his wife would react, and not wanting to take the risk. Unfortunately, she did awaken when Utgar and the human were arguing about the name of the salvage yard. Utgar wanted to keep the original name, but the human wanted to change it to Sarge's Salvage, because the vast majority of the customers were human and thought that would attract more. Utgar's wife lumbered in, irritable from hunger and the noise, and getting more pissed off by the minute. She wandered in, took one look around, then snarled at both of them. Utgar quickly ran to get her food and settled her into a couch that could accommodate her massive girth. "Dear good news. I'd like you to meet." She snapped her teeth at Utgar's arm, then began eating, glaring at the human the whole time. The transponder chirped insistently, and the human smiled sheepishly. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Smokey. I'd chat some more, but they're calling me." He hobbled out of the room quickly as she growled at him. Utgar stood by nervously, fetching additional helpings of anything she might want more of. Finally she finished and gave a belch. She shook her head at Utgar. "You cannot be serious. On top of losing our livelihood gambling, somehow you thought it would be a good idea to bring home a pet. While I'm pregnant no less, and of all the vermin to choose from, you picked a human." "A human? Those things are from a Class 9 death world. Do you have any idea of what kind of pathogens those things carry? And just when I think that there is absolutely no possible way for you to think of something stupider, you managed to surprise me. Again. You brought home a defective human. It's nothing but stumps. It can't even be trained to perform useful tasks because it's missing body parts. It has no function except to eat excess food before it spoils." Utgar tried to soothe her. "My darling, just let me explain a moment. You see," she roared and swung at him. Fortunately, her broad stomach kept her firmly settled in the couch, so the blow was fairly weak. She grumbled, "At least the children will have something to play with." Just then, she noticed the human standing in the doorway to the room. "And something to eat." She got up from the couch and waddled back to her bed. After she passed out and began snoring thunderously, the human spoke. "Wow, you weren't kidding about Mrs. Smokey." "Oh, was she serious about eating?" Utgar shrugged. "Ursoid women get rather irritable during pregnancy. Our justice system actually has a set of laws dealing specifically with pregnant females that affects charging, verdicts, and sentencing." The human rolled his eyes. "So what's the policy? Let them do whatever the hell they want." Utgar nodded pretty much. The human replied, "Yeah, it's basically the same with us too." Utgar fetched them hot beverages while the human briefed him. In that bizarre hybrid language the human used that was a verbal casserole of different human languages, transport guild jargon, and military nomenclature. Buyers for derelicts and several random parts had been found. It seemed there was a tribe of humans, bizarre even by their standards, called orange throats or something like that eschewed civilized life, preferring to live in unregulated flotillas or on barely survivable death worlds. They were political anarchists, distrustful of any organized government, even disaster and poverty relief agencies. They also were distrustful of regimented education, especially any subject that didn't have immediate tangible applications. However, they were truly masters of improvised engineering. Anything that didn't explode performed far better than one would have thought possible. 3 days later, the orange throat representative arrived with his family. He was tall, almost painfully skinny, but with ropey muscles and tendons. His chest garment was a thin white sleeveless pullover tunic. His groin and leg garment were trousers made from a heavy blue cloth. His feet were in heavy shoes that appeared to be the processed hide of an animal. He had a currency container that was attached to his trousers with a long tether. The container also had shreds of a noxious plant that the human chewed like cud. The human quite fond of the cud, keeping so much of it in his mouth that it actually caused a lump in the bottom of his face. The human wore a head covering that was deliberately slightly askew, not sideways nor straight. The human also had an insignia applied to the skin of his upper arm, at the shoulder, that matched a large insignia painted on his ship. His ship looked like scrap that was most likely to be abandoned at the salvage yard, except the insignia was painted on with fresh, bright colors. It was a red rectangle with two blue intersecting lines, and the lines had silver/white stars. He introduced himself as Earl. Earl's wife, Wanda Jean, was as opposite as possible of him while still being the same species. He had pale skin while hers was dark. He was tall, with his head up to Utgar's shoulder. She was short, with her own head not even reaching her husband's shoulder. Her husband looked almost emaciated, but she was excessively plump, to the point of looking ready to give birth to at least 4 offspring. When Utgar congratulated her on her impending delivery, she glared at him angrily. Utgar took it in stride. Pregnant females were always hostile. He offered her food and the comfortable couch. They had several offspring with them. Utgar noticed she would randomly swing to hit one now and then, as his own wife would occasionally do. Maybe humans and Ursoids weren't so different after all. The one thing Utgar found repugnant was that she had small tubes of plants that she would set on fire, then inhale the smoke. Evidently, the small tubes were the same plant that Earl had for his cud. Earl, Utgar, and the salvage yard human sat down to negotiate prices and inventory. Earl had both currency and random salvage to offer in trade. They joked, argued, and haggled for a few hours, while sharing a few alcoholic beverages. As they were finishing up, Utgar's wife came waddling in sleepily. She looked around and gave a low growl. Wanda Jean stood up. "Hey, sugar, let me get out of your way. I'm so sorry that my kids and these dumbass men woke you up. Now you just sit and relax. I hear you're expecting. I'll go grab you something to eat." Wanda Jean went to the kitchen and made a huge plate for Utgar's wife. She brought it back as the men were trying to talk in hushed tones. She barked at them, "If you can't keep it down, go outside." Earl hollered back, "We're in space, woman," she retorted. "Don't let the airlock hit you in the arse on the way out." Earl grumbled. Then the men moved their negotiations to Earl's ship. It turned out to be pretty efficient, since Earl was able to get a closer look at available inventory, and actually wound up purchasing far more than he had originally bid for. Once the men were gone, Wanda Jean and Utgar's wife chatted. They exchanged stories about their children and the incredible dumbassery of their husbands. At one point, when Wanda Jean heard about the bad bet, she exclaimed, "Damn girl! You let him live? I thought I was married to the king of idiots, but that's just a whole other level. And then he goes bringing home some raggedy dude you don't know from Adam. I got the same problem with mine. He rides his ships rough, so we are always spending money on repairs. And then his stupid cousin Bobby John comes by, because he's lost another job and his wife won't let him back in the ship until he gets another one. So then I'm stuck with the both of them." Utgar's wife shook her head. "Why do you allow this Bobby John to stay?" Wanda Jean sighed. When Earl's pawpaw made his will, he knew Bobby John would lose his half of the inheritance within a year. So he made a deal with Earl. Earl got everything, but he has to take care of Bobby John. You know how it goes with family. You love them, but just can't stand being around them. Utgar's wife and Wanda Jean laughed over that and kept chatting. Wanda laughed so hard she cried when she heard the part about how Utgar had adopted a defective pet human that probably lost body parts drinking excessively, now being reduced to stumps. Wanda slammed her hand on the armrest of her chair. "Here, boy. Here, Stumpy. Sit, Stumpy, sit. Roll over, Stumpy. Stumpy, come." On Earl's ship, Utgar asked, "What do you think they're talking about?" Earl said, "Whatever it is, I'm pretty sure it's somehow going to wind up being my fault somehow." He looked at the other human. "If you ever think about getting married, remember this. It won't stop you, but at least you won't be surprised." The men chuckled as Earl found a derelict that was missing half the ship, but still added it to the inventory list. Utgar asked, "I thought you were just looking for relatively intact structures. Why do you want that?" Earl answered, "Our flotilla is by the nebula that's on the border between the Unla and the Denari. Between the storms and the occasional crossfire from border disputes, our ships take a beating. Utgar and the other human looked at him wide-eyed. Then Utgar blurted out, "Are you people insane? More than usual for your kind? You must be in some sort of mass suicide death cult to live there." Earl chuckled, spit out his cud, took a long drink from his beer, put in a new larger piece of cud that distorted his speech slightly, then adjusted his hat a few times, back the same askew position it was in moments ago. "That little piece of hell is the best place to be, because ain't no damn government constantly trying to crawl up your ass. Out there, folk leave you alone, but will help you out in a second when you need it. Yeah, it's dangerous sometimes, but we are also free. Your neighbor minds his own damn business as long as you ain't hurting anybody. And we ain't got no damn government stealing our wages to give it to lazy bastards who don't want to work every time they want to get re-elected and need votes. They can kiss my whole ass. My money is mine, to feed my family, not some lazy bastard that thinks the universe owes him." Utgar blinked rapidly, taking in everything Earl just said. It seemed that the rumors regarding the orange-throat human tribe were all true, and if anything, understated their ideology. The veteran nodded along, then raised his beer in a toast. Damn right. Fuck 'em. This left Utgar even more confused, but to be polite, he clinked his bottle against the others. "I'm confused. You are a veteran. You took an oath to support your government and fought to defend it. And yet, you have strong disdain for it. That doesn't make sense." The human chuckled. "As a vet, I have the most experience with the government, which is why I'm the first one to say not to trust the bastards. That should tell you something." That statement confused Utgar even more. He had learned that when a human didn't make sense, then gave you an explanation that made even less sense, your best option was to simply let it go. He had tried to follow up with more questions during previous encounters. It always ended one of two ways. The men went back, with the humans being mildly drunk and committed to becoming fully inebriated to celebrate the deal. Utgar wanted to join them, but was hesitant, considering his wife's pregnancy, irritability, and ongoing displeasure at their current financial state. The salvage yard human had chuckled. "I guarantee you Mrs. Smokey will be in a much better mood when she sees the currency." When they walked in, Wanda Jean and Utgar's wife took one look at the three of them, then burst out laughing. The salvage yard human looked nervous. "Are we in trouble?" Utgar replied, "They aren't trying to hit us, so that's a good sign, I think." Earl extended a fist towards Utgar Truth Brother. Happy wife, happy life. Utgar wasn't sure what to do, as Earl kept the fist extended, so he gently clasped it in his own poor hand and shook it like the human handshake. Utgar went to the kitchen to get more beers for the men. He was quite relieved to see that Wanda Jean had been feeding his wife steadily. He eagerly told her of the deal he just closed. She gave a half smile. "Well, it looks like Stumpy has made himself useful after all." The salvage yard human gave them a flat look and shrugged. He had been called worse. As Earl and Wanda Jean left, Earl gave a copy of his music archive to Utgar, along with the contact information of several other potential customers. A few of his personal favorites were ancient ballads about cargo transport adventures and mishaps. His personal favorite was a quick-paced song that described alcohol smuggling and had even inspired several theatrical performances where the smugglers evaded incompetent law enforcement. Wanda Jean promised to call and visit, especially once the children were born, and bring a treat called peach cobbler.